Yes, Barbados and good news of the bill. Mentioned today. Yes, yes.
This sitting is resumed. Papers. Or any other government business.
I beg to give notice of the audited financial statements of the Board of Management of Leicester School for the financial years ended 31st of March 2007 to March 31st, 2011, and the audited financial statements of the Board of Management of the Christchurch Foundation School for the financial years ended 31st of March 2006 to March 31st, 2010. I also beg to give notice of the annual report of the Air Transport Licensing Authority for the period April 1st, 2013 to March 31st, 2014, and the annual reports of the Air Transport Licensing Authority for the periods April 1st, 2014 to March 31st, 2015, and April 1st, 2015 to March 31st, 2016. I also beg to give notice of the Customs Amendment Regulations 2020 and the Immigration Amendment Forms and Fees Regulations 2020.
Government notices.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Bill 2020.
First reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the first reading of the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Bill 2020.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read the first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Government business is resumed. We now revert to the Standing Finance Committee.
Standing Finance Committee resumes with Head 34. We continue for the Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you very much. I had a few questions, have a few questions in relation to the process involving the Employment Rights Tribunal. And the head of the Labour Department has very correctly pointed out that they have a conciliatory role under the Employment Rights Act. I'm wondering whether there is any training protocol in place for the training of the staff of the Labour Department for that particular statutory duty. Obviously, the whole area of mediation, conciliation, alternative dispute resolution is one that is very important to the delivery of justice in Barbados. And justice doesn't just mean courtroom justice, it also means justice between employer and employee. And within the high court system, mediation is taking on a very important role, but it has become apparent that you can't just send people in and tell them to mediate. So we have specialist mediation training so as to support that role. In this instance, the Employment Rights Act says that conciliation must take place within 45 days of the complaint. And I'm aware that in some instances, your department is attempting to do conciliation 5 years after. Now, I can't see any point in doing a conciliation 5 years after. Can't see any point in doing a conciliation 5 years after. And I am therefore wondering whether the personnel who are responsible for this conciliation mechanism have been appropriately trained and have the necessary skill set to apply to such a sensitive and important area.
Madam Chair, the question regarding training protocol for it would be the labor officers within the department is the labor officers who manage and administer the conciliation process. Much of the training or preparedness of those officers is on-the-job training. Locally, there's not available targeted or purpose-designed conciliation training program. And for that reason, we have engaged with the International Labour Organization in the past, and most recently during the latter half of 2019 to put on a special, I think it was 1 week training program utilizing the skills of a former chief labor officer and also specialist team from the ILO to take the officers through the paces of conciliation. And at the time, that course was open also to workers and employers' representatives. In addition to the assistance we may get from the ILO from time to time, the department has in the past, maybe over the past 10, 12 years or so, have made use of a private sector entity, but not a Barbadian entity, the Stitfeld Handy Group, where they offer on an annual basis alternative dispute resolution training, and that has proven also to be helpful, particularly for newer officers. Another factor that we need to bring to bear as well is that there has been some retirement and staff changes in the industrial relations section. And as a result, the officers there, of the 9 officers, the 9 labor officers we have, approximately half of those officers would still be categorized as relatively new because the learning curve for the technical officers in the department is pretty long. In under a year, it is not likely that you can get a person to perform a conciliation role or safety and health role for that matter at the level that would be desirable. So a training protocol, there is not, as I said, a purpose-built or purpose-designed program, but we do try to make up for the shortfall, and it is a shortfall, using on-the-job training, utilizing the more experienced officers to help, and then the ILO or the private entity, generally the Stitfeld Handy program.
Could you tell me how many officers you have who actually are available and who actually do the conciliatory function?
Of the 9 officers, they all do the conciliatory function that may come up under the Employment Rights Act.
And how many, I'm not sure if this is question number 3, thank you. How many applications do you have on average per year?
This would be, sir, applications for
Well, the process
conciliatory
is that a person who considers himself to have a complaint against an employer will apply to you, won't they?
Yes.
And it is that, at that point, that the section under the Employment Rates Act is triggered, requiring to do the conciliation within 45 days. I'm concerned about the backlog and the delays in having that conciliation. So I'm trying to find out how many, if you have 9 officers doing conciliations, how many applications did you have, for example, in 2019? Or put another way, how many conciliations did you do in 2019?
I don't have that statistic right to hand, so I wouldn't be able to give that exact figure right now.
If I can join the conversation, just to say that one of the reasons why we continue after the number of days in the statute to attempt conciliation is to continue our efforts to reach resolution so as not to put an inordinate burden on the Employment Rights Tribunal. And the number of labor officers that we have, the number of calls that we get for what might be considered more routine questions, queries, challenges, is one of the things that hamstring us a bit. And I go back to repeat that we will have to intensify, and we will be intensifying our efforts in putting more information in the public domain, so that we don't get as many, hopefully over time, the number of calls will fall, so that labor officers can devote more of their time to actually working on the conciliation that some effort needs to be put into, rather than answering questions, the answers for which could probably be otherwise provided for those persons who need the answers.
I think part of the challenge, sorry, go
In
ahead.
terms of the numbers,
Right. As it relates to the numbers, we received, this is between April 2019, start of financial year 19, to September 2019, we received approximately 3,209 complaints. Of the 3,209 complaints, 65 disputes were conciliated. And 65 disputes being conciliated means those that have been completed, not to mention those that are in train. And we referred a further 78 to the ERT.
I think that the whole point about the Employment Rights Tribunal is to move things through swiftly. And I think that was its appeal over going through a court process with its attendant delays. And I'm just a little bit concerned that your approach to dealing with it, as well-meaning, as good intention as it is, may really not be helping to serve the purpose that it should be. Under the statute, if you are not able to complete that conciliation within 42 days, the chief labor officer must send the matter to the tribunal. No, forgive me, but I happen to be the Attorney General. So these rules mean a lot to me. The law says that you must accept in extenuating circumstances. It says you shall make a report to that effect to the tribunal. Now, I understand the minister's concern because the tribunal is having challenges with space to have hearings and so on, sharing a conference room and things of the sort. But I don't think that it is fair to the litigants for you to decide that you're going to intentionally slow down things so as to spare the tribunal. That doesn't help anybody. And I really think that we should follow the law. It says if you can't effect a settlement within 42 days, you shall make a report of that to that effect to the tribunal itself. So I'm afraid you don't have any discretion in the matter. at the end of that 42 days and you've not been able to effect a settlement, you must send it on. And it then requires us as the executive, as the government, to ensure that the commission itself has the ability to deal with those things fairly and quickly. And that's my concern. I think
Yeah.
if you look at section 44(1), you know, you're only in extenuating circumstances that you're allowed to extend that time.
Thank you for raising that, Honourable Attorney General, because it speaks to, you're talking about justice for the litigant, you're talking about speed, and I would want to suggest that given the current structure, you identified a number of the constraints that the Employment Rights Tribunal has. Given the constraint, some of what we do is in an effort to speed up the process, even though I have to admit, as you correctly indicated, that we may be going a little bit against the law because we have 200 plus cases before the tribunal. And given the limited time and space, and, well, I'm going to speak to that a little bit later, it sometimes, in my own view, is better to continue the conciliation process as it relates to time that it's going to take. Now, moving though to the Employment Rights Tribunal itself, you identified the space constraints. There is another matter that we will have. I know that you were able to deal with the court system in a particular way. Maybe we will have to do the same thing. Additional judges, additional tribunals. We, like you, are interested in people getting justice. And it may mean that we may have to get additional tribunals. The other thing is that we have been using a model which does not speak to people whose only work is being a tribunal chair. So that we find ourselves using the time, and tribunal chairs find themselves using the time in between their other their occupation as attorneys at law, and the time that they can devote to the work of the Employment Rights Tribunal is in many cases limited. And we will probably have to seek the route. We will obviously engage with your good self and your good office to work through if we should have dedicated tribunal chairs, persons who can devote the kind of time to the very serious responsibility and allow the litigants to have justice served in a timely manner. At this time, that is not happening. And it is not happening because of the reasons that we indicated. We bought last year some additional equipment to allow 2 tribunals to meet at the same time. But now we have the issue with space. So sometimes one tribunal has to be shifting around, and there are challenges with space, so we have not been able to have on a consistent basis 2 tribunals meeting at a time. So there's the issue of the space, there's the issue of persons who are able to dedicate their time. Now, if persons are going to dedicate enough time, sufficient time, it means that the emoluments that they receive will have to reflect that dedication of time. That is also an issue that we as a ministry have been, I don't want to say fighting, agitating for. And it is one that we as a government will have to take seriously, address our minds to, because I agree with the tenor of the Attorney General's comment. He didn't say these words, but the term that we use all the time is justice delayed is justice denied. And the Employment Rights Tribunal was set up to bring swift justice to ordinary people, to working people. We have to discuss those space issues, staffing issues as it relates to tribunal chairs, and commensurate remuneration issues. Those are some of the issues, the challenges that we face in attempting to dispense the justice that people deserve.
Thank you very much for your clarification.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to compliment the Minister for doing a wonderful job in this very important ministry. This department, Madam Chair, has helped Barbados over the years in its most difficult moment. And I speak mainly of the seasonal program, which many of our parents and constituents have traveled to Canada, to the one in the USA, and of course Britain. After the Second World War, your department was so instrumental in getting people across to London, and I dare say that I believe that you are still in the process of helping a number of our Barbadians to get abroad as well. I want to find out though, how many persons are now employed in the US farm program, how many persons you have employed in the Canadian farm program, and how many people you are likely to be involved in the UK market. Because, as I said before, your department has helped us in our time of need. At this time, with unemployment rising to above 9% or so, I believe that your department must be called upon to help us find this employment.
Thank you, Honourable Member. At this point, we have no persons in the United States in programs. That is the one I indicated earlier today that we were placing a lot of attention on. We have a new experience, well, I should say new experience, but a liaison officer who has had quite some experience in that area. We have faced some of the challenges of immigration restrictions and approaches to immigration in the United States, but as we engage in discussions, we have another one, I think in about 2 weeks, with personnel from the United States Embassy here. But we believe, we are pretty certain that there are opportunities in the United States to be had, and we are vigorously pursuing those opportunities. The UK opportunity is one that we are currently working on. The interviews have been concluded. The persons from the UK would have left Barbados last week. I think it was last week. And that pilot program is intended to employ 50 persons in agriculture in the United Kingdom. While we were here, and actually while on the same day that we held a press briefing to notify the country, to inform the country of that opportunity, the Home Office in the United Kingdom issued a position paper, made an announcement indicating that that pilot program, the numbers have increased. And so we believe that Barbados will have the opportunity to add to the 50 who we've already committed to having as part of that pilot program. That came about as a result of, we believe, Brexit and the slowdown of workers from Europe, particularly what was called Eastern Europe, into the United Kingdom, and the development, the continued development of the agricultural sector in the United Kingdom, especially in our case, what is called edible horticulture, agriculture, how we refer to it. So we believe that there are additional opportunities to be had in the United Kingdom market. In Canada, which remains the flagship, we have 185 approximately persons employed there. On the seasonal agricultural workers program, 165. And then on a similar program, but called the temporary foreign workers program, 30 persons employed in hotels. Again, when is it? Next week. Next week. Yeah, next week. A hotel that we met with while we were over there last year personnel from that hotel will be coming in to interview persons. They recognize that there's value in workers from Barbados, and they're coming in on the 2nd of March to interview workers to be employed in their establishment in Ontario. So we are maintaining that program and being aggressive in expanding that program. We recognize that you, Honourable Member, that I've said to existing and potential
Honourable Member,
employers.
you're now on 4 minutes of your answer.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that we've indicated to those who we consider our partners, because we consider this to be a relationship that we are building with potential employers, and we have shared with them that we have good workers to offer, and they can benefit just like our workers can benefit.
Now, when they look at your estimates, they do not see any figures at all here for your travel abroad to solicit, for the Labor Department, to solicit help from foreign employers. As I said before, this department has been the flagship on helping Barbados over the years. It helped Barbados after the First World War. It helped Barbados through the years. If you look at a country like Jamaica, like Mexico, like Philippines, the Labor Department is proactive in finding employment for a number of workers, those persons who have been laid off in the country. And therefore, my view is that your department then has to be at the forefront in finding employment for those persons who have been laid off. So I want to find out what it is in your estimate here that you have to show that you are going to be proactive in finding employment for our people. Do you have a figure in here?
There is under the subprogram 422, sorry, under operating expenses, there is a sum of money in there. Now, Honourable Member, I cannot say to you that it allows us to do everything that we would want to do. Like most other members who have the privilege of leading ministries, continue to be cognizant of where we are as a country in terms of financial resources. So we have to be very strategic in terms of our outreach. But we have included sums there that will allow us to go out and solicit opportunities for our people. I think I mentioned this earlier. I come out of a background where to do business, you have to be in people's faces and you have to build relationships. Yes. And we are taking that approach. We are also aware that you have to creep before you walk, especially when funding is not plentiful. And we have taken the approach that we're going to do this on a rotating basis, so that 1 year we'll go to one destination, but the big three for us would be Canada, United Kingdom, hopefully the US, and based on the conversation earlier, sorry, what is it? Canada, UK, US. Now, there's also going to have to be some activity in terms of our moving around in the northern part of South America, that is to say Guyana and Suriname. But given the resources that we have, we're going to do it on a rotating basis, and we're going to find other ways of staying in contact, staying in touch. We have started, maybe for the first time, conference calls with our liaison service, so that even though there's distance between us, they understand the energy that we are putting in at home base and that we expect them to put in there. We are also taking slightly different approaches to when they go to trade shows. For example, there used to be times when they were instructed that they could not stay on an additional day or two to interface with people in a part of Canada, as I'm referring to Canada in particular, that is 6 or 7 hours of flying away from Toronto. We've said that doesn't make any sense. It's actually silly. So that when one of our people goes to BC or Vancouver, someplace far away, we're saying to them, take an additional couple of days and interface with not just those employers who are currently in the program, but seek out new business. So we're going to find ways to stretch the dollar, as we say in Rosehill, and still be effective. But we are definitely going to stay in contact and as far as possible in the face of those persons we want both to stay in the program as well as those we want to join. There are other countries who are being very, very aggressive. Many in Latin America, well, Central America in particular, and some of our Caribbean neighbors, very aggressive, going after the business. I know that you have to spend money to earn money, but we're going to do it prudently, judiciously, but effectively.
Well, I must tell you that your Caribbean neighbor, Jamaica, is spending this financial year over $1 million in soliciting help from across the Caribbean because they believe in remittances, and their remittances form a large part of their income and their revenue. And we have also did that. I remember, you're too young to understand and remember, my sister lived in England. She went there after the Second World War, and we went to school based on the remittances that came from abroad. My final question, though, to you is this. In 2014, a number of workers were laid off from the government service under the last administration. And there are some people who have not been able to find employment yet. Because your department used the concept of last in, first out. I want to find out, are you still a disciple of that principle?
Our department doesn't use, we are not called on to use methods like those. You may be referring to the Ministry of the Public Service, but I'm not saying that to dodge the question. We do have a certain level of oversight as it relates to statutory organizations. Now, what has caused us a challenge is a fair mechanism for making decisions. In the absence of a good performance appraisal system, it is difficult to ask leaders in any organization to make decisions that will not appear to be very subjective decisions. We decided as a social partnership, because the approach of last in, first out was not government's decision. It was not the decision of the business sector. It was not the decision of workers and their representatives. It was a collective decision. And we the partners, came to the conclusion that in the absence of that more fair and objective method of determining who is performing, who is not performing, who should be in another function, in the absence of a good system of doing that, then last in, first out was what we agreed to do. Now, what that says is that we have to move forward, and I'm pretty sure the Ministry of the Public Service is actually doing that, moving forward to implement an appraisal system, one that is rigorous, one that is fair, and one, while we do not expect to have to go again the route of any large-scale adjustments in employment, there still needs to be, if we're thinking about and talking about developing people, there needs to be a good appraisal system, a good system of assessment of people, so that workers know where they're strong, where they're not so strong, where they're weak, where they need to address their minds to improvement, so that at the end of the day, we build a cadre of people who are effective, who are efficient, and who are able to hold jobs both in the public and the private or the third sector.
But if that's your principle, because they asked you if you subscribe your department, subscribe to the principle of last in, first out. And if you subscribe to that principle, is it not true then that those persons who go off and the employer has vacancy will be the first to come back on? Because I am aware that there are several persons within my constituency who were laid off in 2014 that have not been re-employed, both in government as well as in the private sector. So your department must be held accountable when this thing happens.
But permit me, Honourable Member, I don't know if I'm out of order to disagree with you.
Yeah, of
And
course.
if I am out of order, then I withdraw this statement. But to say to you that this ministry does not hold a position on those matters, or remit is to facilitate employment of people and to facilitate the development of people, particularly workers who can contribute to their own well-being and to the well-being of the country. We agree, and all social partners agree, that those who have been retrenched, separated from employment in the public service, should have first opportunities to be re-engaged. And that is one of the reasons why when we hear from the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology on the modernization program, you will hear that some of those persons who were separated from employment have regained employment. We are also going to be supporting the efforts of wider government for the engagement of persons who would have been separated from the Ministry of Transport Works and Maintenance. As the construction projects come on stream and intensify, we expect that they too will have, let's say, pride of place in terms of opportunity to be re-engaged. The one thing a democratic society, though, does not do is to insist that any employing organization take a particular person to work. That is something we cannot do. We are not a command economy. Our society has not evolved in that way, and so we encourage, but we do not dictate to employers who they can or cannot employ.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael West Central. He has not spoken. He was before Marshall. Marshall spoke already. Marshall spoke already. Yes, but he hasn't.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. I want to go to obviously program 420, and obviously the Labour Department has a role, and certainly your ministry has a role in introducing legislation and also for the benefit of both employer and employee.
Chair, I'm not hearing clearly.
Just, you can't hear you.
Again, some noise right here.
Yeah. Is that better? Okay, thanks. Now, I was making the point that I'm referring to Program 420 within the Ministry of Labour. And the issue here that I have, and perhaps you can help me to understand how you plan to deal with it if you intend to do so. But we have several pieces of labor legislation scattered across in different statutes. We have the most recent one that comes to mind with the Employment Rights Bill. You also have the severance. You also have how they would pay. You have the Protection of Wages Act. In other Caribbean jurisdictions, sometimes you might even find they have a code of labor. We don't have that here. But I would like to perhaps understand if your ministry, sir, is thinking about going the route of perhaps harmonizing labor legislation and bringing it to one place. Because obviously when we go forward with other pieces of legislation, there will come a time when we will have to look at responsible reemployment. The whole issue of retirement and the issues associated there that I won't go into this afternoon. Perhaps legislation to deal with part-time and this whole business of the contract for service and contract of service. So I don't know, Minister, if you or your officials will be in a position to perhaps tell us if you are preparing to consider any harmonization of local labor law. And I'll come back.
All right, thank you very much, Honourable Chair. I'm going to take it only because it more speaks to policy. We've recognized the move across the Caribbean toward the labor code. We've also heard from the International Labour Organization, their Caribbean office has been encouraging us to go that route as well. We have not spent a lot of time putting our minds to the discussion, even though we have mentioned it among ourselves on a few occasions. The reason why we haven't done that is because with our limited resources, we have really to apply ourselves to the more urgent matters. The labor code, though, I believe, while it is highly desirable and may improve the efficiency of our worker management relations and the legislative underpinning of that, it is one that we have had to put as a medium-term consideration as opposed to an immediate consideration. So there are a number of pieces of legislation that are already there. Safety and health at work, for example, that we have spent quite a bit of time getting the regulations to work, because if we went to labor code, we still need the regulations for that. A labor code would include discrimination. So that kind of work still needs to be done. We've committed ourselves to tidying up a lot of the mess left by the last administration. So those regulations were outstanding, not dealt with, as though the safety and health of people, of workers, was not important. So the rush to pass the act is passed, but then to get the regulations to give life and meaning, we've dedicated our time and efforts to making sure that what is there works, spending time on overseas employment programs, for example. But the labor code is definitely something that we will have to look at, because that harmonization for us will constitute the next level of efficiency and effectiveness. Having everything in one place, changes to one aspect feeding through to all the other aspects that it touches. That is the next stage, and we will be addressing our minds to that in the not too distant future. We will also, as we do that, we've been promised assistance from the International Labour Organization in our efforts in that regard. And so once we're able to dedicate people and time resources to it, then we will push ahead to have that labour code sorted out once it is the will of the Cabinet that we go in that direction.
And just, Madam Chair, the issue of, a couple of constituents asked me to ask this question, the whole issue of a contract for service or a contract of service. And I don't know if, in terms of a policy position coming out of the ministry, because obviously we know the distinction. For those who practice it, we know the distinction. But what is really causing, obviously, some constituent stress is that oftentimes you need a job, you want to have a job, but then you get into an arrangement. And oftentimes the arrangement, only at the end, sometimes people understand what has taken place. So perhaps, Minister, your officials could perhaps tell us if there are any policy positions under consideration at this time to facilitate perhaps knowledge for those out there who would perhaps enter such arrangements not understanding what happens at the end. And I don't think I need to go into explaining what is the difference between a contract for and a contract of service. But perhaps, Minister, you could enlighten us, and I'll come back again.
All right, I'll ask the Chief Labor Officer to speak to one of the approaches that we're using in that regard.
Madam Chair, in looking at the contract for or the contract of service, the Employment Rights Act since 2013, when it was proclaimed, has at the first schedule what we can refer to as a template of the key factors you can consider when you're trying to determine if it is a contract of or a contract for. The template is not exhaustive, and each case will still turn on its particular facts. But some of the factors it would address would be, is the employee asked to give personal and exclusive service to that particular employer? Is the work carried out within fixed hours? Who provides the tools? What is the nature of the remuneration? The age-old, who looks after the NIS deductions and payments? So those are some of the things that go into helping determine whether it's a contract of or a contract for. And that is something that can also be determined if it is a matter that needs to come before the department en route to the ERT, the Employment Rights Tribunal.
Thank you. I understand it from the position within the ERA, but I think in terms of maybe having a communication campaign or social media campaign, I think you alluded to the works of your ministry, because I think the time is now, because we are witnessing a lot of that, and certainly there are constituents who come to us and complain. They don't go into a lot of the legislation. I understand the legislation as well. It speaks on the acid test you have to apply in respect of qualifying whether it's a contract of or contract for. But maybe the ministry perhaps would want to consider how best they can maybe strengthen aspects of labor legislation to ensure that this is known to all and sundry, because despite it is within the ERA, the Employment Rights Act, I am aware, because it was drawn to my attention by one or two constituents, of practices that could effectively speak not a contract for, but a contract of service. And sometimes so maybe I will leave it there in respect. I don't know, perhaps, if maybe the time has come where since we have Thomas numbers, that perhaps that could feature prominently in terms of isolating, in terms of the contract for service in the context of an employment arrangement or a non-employment arrangement. But I will leave it to the planners to think about it, but it's something that is creeping in, and it is something that we have to monitor. Otherwise, it would have implications for us, but even national insurance, it will have significant implications for a national insurance scheme, because you may have a lot of people at work, but then you don't see the level of contribution income coming in. But I'll leave it there because I think it's something we could discuss. But I also want to go quickly, Chair, to the whole issue of manpower plan. I know you discuss aspects of it, but I firmly believe that in Barbados, perhaps, and I know you have a lot of programs, but one program perhaps, and maybe you have it already, I would like to encourage your ministry to pursue, through policy and other mechanism is the whole issue of management training and management development in Barbados. I believe it is something that we can all contribute. I know that there are companies that have management training, development programs, etc. But I think the time is now where we need to fast track and try and develop more of our local management, but do it through policy and through manpower planning, which I know your ministry is very good at. So I'll leave that for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. What has crossed my mind but has not yet been discussed, the whole matter of management training, we are recognizing based on the cases brought to us and issues brought to us at the level of the Labor Department and also the Employment Rights Tribunal, that there is a lack of knowledge, lack of understanding at the management level. And it is not just an understanding of particular statutes, particular pieces of legislation. There is, in my view, and I think in the view of a number of other people, a weakness in our country at the middle management level, a serious weakness. And I'm just going to say what has crossed my mind because this is not policy. We haven't talked about it, discussed it. But maybe the time has come to include as part of government's facilitation of business development a stipulation that leaders at various levels of organizations are exposed, compulsorily so, to management training, effective management training. Now, I'm throwing that out. It is something that crossed my mind, and it is something that we in our ministry will have to discuss further because it would include and involve ministries outside of our own. But there must be, I believe the time has come for some kind of stipulation that forces people to do the training that they ought to do. We believe in the ministry in upward mobility. One of the challenges in upward mobility within organizations is that persons sometimes are put into positions because they are good in the position that they are in. So they're put into the next position up, but they are not always given the tools that are necessary to perform effectively in that position, especially if that position is a management or supervisory position. So it is an issue that we will have to look at, and look at very seriously. We expect that this economy is going to continue its upward trajectory in terms of expansion, and with that will come then all issues that may be small now are going to be magnified when the economy really starts to take off. And so these are matters that we have to take into consideration and act on with a degree of urgency, and that we commit to do.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to first of all commend you, Minister, and your team for the responses thus far to the queries that have been raised. I think you are a perfect fit in this ministry, given not just the connection to the religious side, but also certainly to the private sector. And on that point, I believe that the emphasis that is being placed by the Ministry of Labour in relation to the positioning of the third sector is going to be critical to the advancement of the economy. I say that because I think there's been a lot of feelings of neglect in the last few years in relation to that particular sector and the role that it can play, and certainly the recognition of what it can do for the economy when a government may not be able to pull a lot of the weight itself. I see that you have put in place a secretariat for the third sector activities of around $31,400. I'm also mindful that your ministry would have worked very closely with the Ministry of Education in relation to the Give Back program and identifying a number of the volunteer entities, which would have included a number of NGOs as well as businesses, corporate entities. And I think, therefore, that the role that you will play, not just in building out the First Job initiative, but certainly in relation to the Give Back program, is going to be critical to developing this area for young people, certainly to be able to enter the employment arena. I want to just say to you that I think that as we build out this particular area where we are requiring the private sector to assist us with finding jobs and also facilitating volunteerism, I would hope that there is a register being kept of all of the business entities that are engaged in these practices, so that there's an easy way to pretty much find who is willing to give back and who is willing to be part of the apprenticeship programs. There's no question on that one. I just wanted to make that as an opening statement to you. The second issue, which I wanted some further clarification on, is that I saw within the estimates an amount for $48,000, an increase from $12,000 last year, in relation to, I believe, what was described as industrial hygiene monitoring equipment. Now, that issue is near and dear to my heart because in the Ministry of Education, we've had to rely on the Ministry of Labor quite a bit, as well as other ministries, Ministry of Health in particular, when we identify environmental issues within the schools. And I know that there were concerns recently in relation to whether the department had the necessary equipment to assist with the testing of plants, particularly businesses around the schools. So I just wanted to get an update whether this particular sum of money was going to help the Ministry of Education certainly to be able to carry out certain tests. And if you could perhaps speak to what resources presently exist within the department to continue the programs to help the Ministry of Education to identify and to work with us on environmental matters in the schools.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Minister. The head of the Occupational Safety and Health section, Mrs. Elcott, will give the response to that.
Good afternoon. My name is Alison Elcott, the Acting Senior Safety and Health Officer with the Safety and Health Section. Right now we have, in theory, one indoor air quality monitor. I say in theory because it is with the manufacturer has been giving some trouble. It has not been with the department since about August last year when it was sent for annual calibration. And due to delays with in Customs Department, we did not receive it until December, and then given that delay, it was not working properly, and we don't know if it was because of storage. So right now it's back with the manufacturer. What we did put in for next year, recognizing that we have that one instrument, and when it has to go for annual calibration, it means that it is unavailable and there's nothing we can do. So we've put in a proposal for a second instrument, which would give us the ability to do what that instrument does, as well as some expanded testing. So once we are able to secure that, then we will be able to do more testing.
Is there a particular maintenance or investigative procedure that is within the department to, once you are alerted that there may be challenges, say, surrounding a school? Because I think we often, as we said yesterday, we often wait until we hear that something is happening to be able to send in the teams. Is there a system presently for being able to identify some of the challenges that we may be encountering? For instance, I have a lot of schools where in the surrounding area there are businesses operating, spray painting. So it's a combination of environmental health, it's a combination of Ministry of Labor being contacted. And sometimes the public is not necessarily aware of exactly how many departments have to be engaged in order to make decisions as to the safety of going back into the environment. So I don't know if you could perhaps speak to that in terms of the intervention mechanisms that are in place. Once you have the equipment, what sometimes has to be done in order to give the all clear?
Okay, so the Labor Department has some role. We have a responsibility within the workplace setting. So in the school, it would be the confines of the school. If there are businesses or workplaces outside of the school, then we would have some authority to go in and do routine checks. So this is whether there's a problem or not. In the instance that there is a problem that is reported to the department, then we would start first with an investigation of the workplace that has reported that problem and work outwards from there. The Environmental Health Department also has some responsibility, and when it comes to the non-workplace, then because it can be a residential activity that can be impacting on a workplace. And then, of course, there's the Environmental Protection Department that has responsibility for ambient air quality. So that department also plays a role. As to the protocol that should exist, all workplaces are required under legislation to have a joint health and safety committee. And it really is the occupiers' responsibility to ensure the safety, health, and welfare of the workplace. The Labor Department is available to provide assistance wherever that is practical and reasonable. So what we encourage workplaces to do is to have that safety consultation mechanism in place, which is made up of half management and half employee representative. And they proactively conduct walkthrough inspections of the workplace from time to time so that problems can be identified early, encourage workers to report concerns, to report issues, so that they can be addressed early. One of the main challenges has to do with the lack of maintenance, or maintenance not being done in a timely manner. And that's not unique to the public sector, but that's one of the challenges that we observe. So by the workplace taking the responsibility that is required under the legislation and being proactive in doing inspections, they may be able to identify problems early, which can be addressed. And where it goes beyond the workplace's ability, then the Labor Department is there to assist and to help in the troubleshooting, not to find the solution to the problem, but help in that process.
And just finally, ma'am, thank you very much for that response. And just finally, I think the ministry is also going to benefit from the former chief education officer now being the permanent secretary. And no doubt her background as a trade unionist, as well as the familiarity with education and the sector, I think minister will serve you well in the years ahead. That said, the permanent secretary is also well aware of my previous concerns in relation to data and the collection of data, not only within the Ministry of Education, but with the Ministry of Labor, as it relates to young people who have left Barbados, or just persons generally who've left Barbados to study, who've either received scholarships or exhibitions, or persons just generally that we send overseas for national development scholarships. And being able to track where those persons are, because I think that has a large part to play in how you determine whether those persons are going to come back to Barbados and the opportunities that are created by the respective ministries as well. So I don't know if discussions have taken place already in relation to how we start to plan for those young people, but I know in the Ministry of Education we are taking steps to capture the data, which I hope then can also be shared with you. But I think you will also have to put in place mechanisms to identify those persons and to really work with all of the respective ministries to identify where are the niche areas, or where are the areas in terms of labor across the various sectors that we as ministers should be identifying, even for national development scholarships as well.
The permanent secretary wants to speak to her former minister.
Karen Best, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Labor and Social Partnership Relations. Yes, I'm well aware of the discussion that we would have had about tracking those young persons who go overseas to study, especially the ones who we invest in very heavily, and for them coming back and trying to place them. We have not, well, as you know, I'm 6 weeks and this is something to 6 weeks and about 14 hours into the Ministry of Labor. So I am still trying to find my way in the ministry, but that database is going to be, is one thing that we are going to be looking at, because that database also will help us in this whole Job Start Plus program, because we have persons like the chair said, who would have studied medicine, studied to be lawyers, engineering, and they're back in Barbados and they are unemployed. And rightfully so, there's some of them, as I said before, there's some of them who are working in supermarkets. So, but I applaud them, because at least they are working and they are not at home being idle. So therefore, yes, we have to make sure that we get that database compiled. And on another note, when we spoke about the safety and health, I intend to look at adding some more equipment to the ministry because, as you said in a previous life, I can't count the amount of sick buildings, and the chair keeps talking about St. Mark's, and you too. And where we are in the building, I just had to move out of my office a couple days ago because of the mold that was very visible in my room. And so we have to get some more equipment because the amount of money that we would have spent for private persons to do the investigation in the Ministry of Education, the budget that we have here in the Ministry of Labor, we can't afford to pay that money. So, and we have trained persons, so we have to invest in equipment so that we can start to really understand what is happening in these buildings. So you have my support.
Thank you. And I don't think St. Mark's is one of the sick ones. They have other issues. Is there a plan for maintaining it after we could get, because it's okay to fix a building today, but what are the plans for maintenance? I know this may come under Ministry of Health and the Health Inspectorate. And not only talking about schools though, right?
I just want to proffer a layman's suggestion. All of the buildings that are being constructed now are being constructed with the use of glass. This morning I came into this building, and I'm a barometer downstairs while I was waiting to come up. Down there the air is extremely heavy and damp. And this is supposed to be a new building. So we have some challenges.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair, I always say that as a development economist, my work is about people and not numbers, but today you've challenged even my very ability to be able to count. So I'm going to try and make sure I count my questions clearly.
Yes, please.
And deliver them one at a time. I want to come to the matter of, the minister spoke earlier about paternity leave and about the notion that it is about men helping the mother. So first let me say that it is not about helping the mother at all. I always say that fathers can't babysit. It's not babysitting because you're the father. So you're not helping the mother, you are doing your duty as the father. But I support the work on sharing the care in households, and I think the paternity leave goes a very long way to be able to do that. But paternity leave is one of those policy issues that I imagine you would have explored in the context of the Social Justice Committee. I note the Secretariat for the Social Justice Committee, your Program 40, Subprogram 23. And I wanted to hear a bit from you, Minister, and your team about the role of the Social Justice Committee in actually being able to effect social justice across government. Now, this is a small allocation. It is a small program, but its role is enormous. I seem to recall that when the Social Justice Committee was conceptualized, it was seen as strengthening the social partnership because the social partnership was so focused on capital and labor and government. And it was a space to not just look at economic inputs, but social and other kinds of inputs to well-being. And so this Social Justice Committee is as important for our governance, I would say, as the social partnership. And so I wanted to hear a bit about that in general, but also, I believe this is question 2, but also as it relates to one particular issue, Minister, if you'll allow me, and that has to do with the issue of the burden of care in households and people and families living with disabilities. Earlier, the member for St. James North raised the question of the work of people living with disabilities, but I want to come at it in another way. How are we supporting the right to work and the productive capacity of those caring for people with disabilities? Those caring for people. Because I use as an example a very bright, very engaged young woman in my constituency who has a son with autism and who, like many others caring for people with disabilities, finds that she does not have the space and the time to work because it is in fact different perhaps from caring for children or caring for elderly parents. Because the truth is that when your child or loved one is living with a disability, it's not just anybody you're going to let come and take part in that care. So in the context of the Social Justice Committee, what is the work of how are we mainstreaming social justice across ministries, and in particular with respect to those who are carers for people living with disabilities?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The Social Justice Committee, as you indicated, and we have been very clear at the level of the committee to indicate that it is not an adjunct to the social partnership. It stands in its own right. The Cabinet has agreed to the policy position that sees the committee reporting directly to Cabinet, but also reporting and sending submissions to social partnership if it is something that the existing social partnership should be addressing. The matter of mainstreaming the Social Justice Committee and its work is one that I'm thankful for the opportunity to raise this at this level. The position of the Social Justice Committee is that every policy initiative of government should, the government policymakers, let me go back to this, let me say policymakers, so ministers in government, those who lead in the development of policy. The Social Justice Committee is asking that policymakers share with the committee policy initiatives so that the perspectives of the various entities, areas of society have the opportunity to have an input into what those policy positions, what the final policy could look like. The Social Justice Committee is an excellent vehicle for getting feedback from segments of society that in the normal development of policy you may not be able to get outside of going to a town hall meeting, so that you have the perspective of men, of women, of children, of people living with disabilities, of social workers, a range of persons or segments of the society who can input on policy initiatives, so that the initiative, when finally crafted, has benefited from that input. And so the Social Justice Committee, and I'm making the call here now in this space, to ministers to share with the Social Justice Committee policy initiatives. Allow us, the committee is clear that it is not a policy-making body. So we do not approach the assessment of policy initiatives from the perspective of we are going to determine how this is going to look in its final iteration. The Social Justice Committee recognizes that it is a body that, from the perspective of National Organization of Women, gives an input that will see the final product benefiting from that input, from that perspective. The paternity leave, when we were in the developmental stages of that, bill, that cabinet paper, we presented to the Social Justice Committee. Input was made where that is concerned. The Honourable Member for Christchurch South would have presented to the Social Justice Committee on the matter of governance, and the Social Justice Committee made input. Some members of the committee indicated that in the concept paper that was discussed at the town hall meetings, they recognized some of their input into it. It is a mechanism that allows us to craft government policy in a way that speaks to the particular needs, the desires, the aspirations, or even the vulnerabilities of a wide cross-section of persons in society. And we believe that, especially as a party that crafted its manifesto based on rubbing shoulders and having discussions with people, ordinary people, that now in government, in the development of actual policy positions, we still go that route of consultation. The Social Justice Committee is the committee that this government proffers because the Social Justice Committee comes out of our manifesto. And it is that instrument that is available to all ministers of government, all developers of government policy, to bring their policy initiatives to share, allow us to feedback, and then can take place. No, I think I may have missed this. There was a second part. I got caught up in that first one.
About carers of people with disabilities?
Oh, okay.
And how you're facilitating their work, their inclusion in the workplace?
That is not a matter that we have spoken to at this point, but sufficient that you've raised it. It is one that we will speak to. We have spoken to issues faced by people living with disabilities, and I've raised with the Honourable Member for St. James North. As a matter of fact, I think we are supposed to have a meeting. Well, it was supposed to be before the end of the month, but it's probably going to be early next month, to discuss some particular matters that have been raised with us. The matter that was specifically to do with people living with disabilities as opposed to the caregivers. The caregivers, that matter is one that we will have to discuss, and that we will be putting on our agenda to have further discussion on. I also want to say that one of the issues, I'm just going to mention this, the Honourable Member for St. Andrews here, one of the issues raised by non-governmental organizations, so this kind of spans both social justice and third sector proper, is the facilitation of them as it relates to spaces to meet. That is one of the challenges that they have, and it is one that as a ministry we'll be approaching the Ministry of Housing to work out how can we facilitate, because we want input from our partners in the third sector, those on the Social Justice Committee. And there are cases where they do not have the facilities to be able to properly help us. That is to say, they need to meet to discuss, for example, and to come up with their own perspectives and positions. And one of the complaints they've had relates to space to meet. Now, that is an issue not easily resolved, but it is one, I just raised it because it is one that we're going to be also addressing as we move forward.
Thank you. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Minister, in response to a query earlier, made reference to doctors, lawyers, qualified, having to make recourse to work opportunities in a supermarket context at a lower level. I thought when I heard those words that it was the utterance of an inexperienced politician who would not have recognized that such could be used against him by an opposition. He did go on to say that it was purely illustrative. And I took him at his word that it was merely illustrative. But I was a bit taken aback a few moments ago to hear the Permanent Secretary speak with reference to that as a reality, as an actuality. That is the case in Barbados today. Now, whereas we may want to applaud those who have worked and studied hard in the institutions of this world, and having returned or come back to a situation where opportunity is not immediate, and I think the word you used, Madam Chair, was desperation. And desperation drives them to that type of recourse. It may be good that we could applaud that approach to life. But for a country that invests so much in its people, so much of taxpayers' money in its people, for us to be acknowledging that today Barbados is a place where such people have to go to those desperate lengths is something that concerns me. So it may in fact not simply be illustrative, it may be illustrative as used by the minister, but I hear the Permanent Secretary suggesting that it is actual and not simply illustrative. My question, though, has to do more specifically with this. What is the Ministry of Labor, Social Partnership Relations doing? What influence is it exerting to facilitate a greater level of synchronization between training and educational opportunities and the needs and demands of the labor market in the context of the National Economic Development Agenda of Barbados?
The Ministry of Labor and Social Partnership Relations, through its Manpower Research and Statistical Unit, is, as we speak, and there are, well, I don't have the heads in front of me, but there is, albeit slightly reduced, funding for that department to execute some research, well, to continue to execute research, because that department is continually researching. I know there have been discussions with there were to be discussions with the Ministry of Economic Affairs from the perspective of the Barbados Statistical Service to synchronize at that level the matter of getting information that would feed into the strategy or human resource development strategy, or meaning the country's human resource development strategy. So that organization, that department in the ministry, does the research. The Human Resource Development Strategy Unit compiles that research after analysis along with the economists in the MRSU, and out of that comes the strategy for developing people generally, but workers in particular, in the country. Earlier, I would have indicated that from that level, then there is close communication and collaboration with the ministry responsible for education, technical and vocational training, and that collaboration does result and will continue to result in curricula being fashioned to meet the needs of the country, both at the present and into the future. That is the kind of collaboration that we seek. We bear in mind, and I hope I'm not straying into education, but I spoke to Command Economy earlier. We do not dictate to children of school age what they should do as it relates to careers. The Barbados Labour Party government well, as an organization and in government, is a democratic socialist government. And we do not say to people, there are too many of any type of occupation, so you cannot study that. We leave those decisions to individuals because we believe in the freedom and the dignity of the individual and their choices. And so, as a government, we believe that whether or not we agree with a decision to get involved in an occupation that might be oversubscribed, to use a word, that we respect, whether or not we agree, we respect the right of the individual to make the decision. And individuals do make those decisions that sometimes, as other individuals, or maybe even as policymakers, we do not agree with. If it does not affect public safety or public health, then we do not believe that we have a right to enforce a change of decision on those persons.
I would think, though, ma'am, that even in a democratic society and even a democratic socialist political organization would, especially in a situation where education and training is largely paid for by the taxpayers, would want to exert some influence on the institutions, whether the secondary or tertiary level, in terms of what they offer, rather than try to exert pressure on the individual as to what they ought to study, although persons can also be incentivized at the level of the individual. But I will move beyond that, if I may, with your leave, ma'am. I was trying to suggest earlier that the banking sector is not readily disposed to investing in the business efforts of smaller enterprises, even medium-sized enterprises, and states like Barbados, governments like, and economies like ours, tend to have to find the capacity to offer capital assistance to such people more often than not. And we make efforts. The trust program is one such program offering a certain amount of small capital for smaller efforts. But I wonder if the minister and the ministry would be of the view that it could offer advice to the government that maybe they should consider a radical shift, and instead of providing for small windows for capital access to smaller, medium-sized enterprises, to go the other route and guarantee loans obtained by those small medium-sized businesses from the traditional banking sector. Maybe that would give the bank a certain greater measure of security, and at the same time serve the interests of these smaller business initiatives and entities, which will help to drive employment in the country at a time where government has to reduce its spending and where the traditional large-scale private sector financial institutions do not come immediately to the crease, because they come there mostly when government has something to offer them. And I just want to know the extent to which this minister and ministry might be willing to urge government in a radical shift. We provide guarantees from major entities, and we could refer to one or two in recent years which have been highly questionable. And we don't want to be controversial right now. We want to stick strictly to the point. And the point is, small businesses, medium-sized businesses can drive the employment situation in Barbados, but they have to find capital. Can government perhaps be encouraged to make that radical shift to the position where they guarantee loans, access to capital from the traditional banking sector?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. This minister, in speaking to matters that fall within the portfolios of other ministers, offer suggestions and advice not in these places, but in places we refer to as the cabinet. And I will respect that, the position that I have, well, not respect, I will stick to the position that I have taken coming into public office in this manner, and offer that kind of advice or share those kinds of perspectives at the level of the cabinet. Respectfully submitted, ma'am.
I do understand that response, Madam Chair, and I'm not totally surprised by it, though a little disappointed with it, because I'm not encouraging anybody, any minister here, to divulge any matter of confidence in the context of collective responsibility that is brought before the Cabinet of Barbados. I'm simply suggesting we have a problem of unemployment in Barbados, which everybody knows. Underemployment, everybody knows. We have a problem of lack of access to capital. Everybody knows that. And therefore, we have to find solutions. Would it be out of place and a matter of breach of principle, precept for a minister to suggest, something that is something we could possibly consider, and I would not mind putting it to the cabinet. But I accept the answer which is given. I have another one, a third one. It has to do with productivity. Now, I raised this matter of productivity recently in another forum, and there were attempts to chastise me and tutor me on these matters, but that's all right. When the economy is in a healthy state, we have often heard the lament that the upward movement of wages in a context where productivity is low is a very bad thing for the private sector and for private interests or for private capital. Wages are going up, but people are not producing. That's what we have heard. I'm not suggesting that's the case. I'm saying that's the lament we have heard. Now we are in a situation in Barbados where wages have been static, hardly any movement in a context where cost of living, taxation, everything else have been skyrocketing. And yet, we anticipate that there's going to be economic growth. You will not have economic growth unless there's a raise in the level of productivity. So a lament comes when wages are upwardly inclined, productivity is low, but we expect productivity to increase in a context where wages are static or on the decline if you take into consideration the increase in the cost of living around there in the context of those wage things. I just want to know what is the minister's position on a matter like this, the Labour Ministry's position on a matter like this, because you don't have to wait for cabinet to speak to these things.
Honourable member, just let me repeat something that I said, I think, 3 times earlier, and that relates to minimum wage. That is one area that this ministry has a certain degree of responsibility for, in terms of policy positions. We recognize a number of things. We acknowledge that on coming into office, we almost immediately gave a pay increase to public servants. We also called on private enterprise to give pay increases. And I can say to you, Madam Chair, that as Minister of Labour, responsible for Labour and conciliator in now two disputes, which included the matter of remuneration, that in both of those instances, there have been pay increases. I am also aware that those are not the only 2 situations where there have been pay increases. So to say that there's not been, or to suggest, maybe not to say, but to suggest that there's been no pay increases is not accurate. But the second thing is that, or the next thing is that besides actual pay increases, there's been increases in reverse tax credit. There is there is a income credit that is also being put into place so that persons who pay tax up to a certain level get those taxes back. those of us who would have looked at December's pay slip versus January's pay slip would have recognized, I have to look at it because I can't help but see what I have that I'm able to spend. Others may not have to do that. But we would have seen the tax rates go down so that while there have been some increases at the level of user fees and some other fees, there has been significant reduction in taxation in the country, as well as the income credit and the reverse credit. Now, productivity is the product, if I may use that construction, of a number of different factors, and it has to do not only with level of pay or level of taxation. It has to do with things like technology. And so the government's modernization program is but one of a number of initiatives, not just in the public sphere, but in the private sector sphere, where there are determined efforts to improve productivity. Leveraging technology is, in today's world, one of the main areas that we use to improve productivity. The other one that I spoke to earlier on a number of occasions has to do with worker management relations. We are talking about people producing as opposed to machines producing. And so for people to produce to their maximum, there has to be a certain comfort level, a certain facilitation, that is to say, they have to be provided with the tools that are necessary to facilitate their production. They have to be managed properly as human beings who have feelings and views and can contribute. They know a whole number of factors. The ones that we're responsible for as a ministry, and I say this not to be narrow, but only because I speak to Head 84. And that relates to the same worker management relations that I spoke to just now, immediately past, but also the matter of our continuing work on the minimum wage level in this country.
I don't have it. I know I've exhausted my 3 questions, but just to respond, if I may, Madam, with your leave. We understand that all those things go into facilitating and spurring productivity. But the fact is, at the end of the day, you cannot express loudly lament that pay is going up, productivity is low, and yet you're expecting better levels of productivity in the context of low wages. I never said that wages have not increased in any sector or for any group of individuals in Barbados. It has. But by and large, across Barbados in the economy, wages have been stagnant for quite some time. And that is a reality that you have to square with. And you will not get growth unless there's increased output, increased productivity. And part of the mix is what people are how people are remunerated. And that is also a reality. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I have one question, and this is in relation to working both in the farm labor program and maybe the hospitality industry. Over the weekend, there was an article in the paper under the heading, Angry Barbadians Plan to Take Action. And this story revolved around an entity who, it appears, was taking money from, the article is saying, 300 individuals to find work in Canada. My question to you is, what is the process, or what would you recommend to youngsters in St. John who are looking to source work in Canada? I mean, what is the registration process? And can those forms be decentralized to make it easier for persons who are unemployed and may find it difficult to reach your ministry to make those applications? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. First, we are here to discuss the estimates, which include $7 million for this head, $7 million plus for this head. I start by saying that to say to the country that government provides certain services for its people based on the taxes that our people pay to the government. And so in the matter of finding employment in external programs, this government does not ask people to pay to get an opportunity to work outside of Barbados. Any entity that is asking for funds to pay, asking people to pay funds to them to find employment is one that people should be wary of, do their due diligence. But I will say to all Barbadians that the Barbados Employment and Career Counseling Service has been set up by this country to facilitate precisely that, the finding of employment in external, well, in countries outside of Barbados. And I encourage Barbadians seeking employment. I mean, hundreds, probably thousands of persons are already registered with us. But I want to encourage young people in St. John and in St. Peter to approach the Barbados Employment and Career Counseling Service. It provides not just a facilitation of employment outside of Barbados. It can help with the writing of CVs, the writing of application letters. It gives counseling based on a person's attitude, aptitude, qualifications, and can help to direct persons into areas that they may want to consider for either for employment or maybe for setting up their own business. The taxpayers of this country, through the vote to Head 84, provides that service through what we call BECS. And so I want to encourage Barbadians to use the provision that government has set up. Staff with professionals, Mrs. Walker-Dennis, sitting behind and to my left, I think. And she manages that unit, that department. And that department is fully capable of providing all that is necessary for persons to take advantage of employment opportunities. That department also directs people in Barbados to training opportunities. They stay on top of training opportunities. What we are looking to do, and we've started some preparatory work on it, and that has to do with a portal that will allow, and the Manpower Research Unit is working on that, a portal that will allow people to see where the vacancies are. That will be part of the service that this organization, this ministry, through the Career Counseling Service provides. The matter of access to forms is one that we've started to talk about, and we've gotten to the point of we have to make it available online. All these forms must become available online. That said, we also still have to remember that not everybody has access to a printer. So we have to do two things. There are some people who are still very paper-driven, including my ministry. So we have to do two things. In the transition, we have to provide paper, and I agree with you, Honourable Member, that we have to decentralize that. Maybe at community centres, have some of that. But we also have, with online forms, give them the possibility of being edited and signed electronically so that a person who may have only the smartphone will not have to print, write up, and send back. So those are things that we are going to be working on. That was part of our discussion within the ministry when we were talking about moving to more digital platforms, disseminating information, but also forms, employment opportunities, all those things we're working on. But in the meantime, before we get to that point, we take the suggestion coming out of your question is that maybe we ought to put some of these forms at the community centers, or at least at the resource centers where there are people staffing them, or post offices there are opportunities, and we will go in that direction.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and also to the member for St. John for bringing us back to a debate on the estimates for the Ministry of Labour and Social Partnership Relations. There are a few questions. The first is as it relates to sub-program 0573. I note here a reduction in your operating expenses from 332,000 to 85,000, and your professional services from 450 to 141. And this is interesting because these are, in essence, you say this section is provide for the hiring of consultants and the development of strategy, and I suspect this is where you would fund both of those heads, but you've cut them significantly in both instances, or they've been cut. And therefore, I'd like to know how you're going to be, and this is also fairly important, human resource sector strategy and skills development. And Minister, maybe while your PS and staff looks for the response to that, unless you have it directly. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Honourable Member. The amounts, we've made some decisions within the ministry to be as effective as we can be, given the constraints, so that while we had intended to do a full assessment of the previous strategy and then some consultancies in terms of developing a new strategy, we have taken the decision that a lot of what will be told to us based on the last strategy is, in our minds, self-evident. And we will use the draft of the new strategy as the basis for the new strategy, as opposed to having, because some work has already been done. And we will move forward with that. Like I spoke earlier to blue economy, marine, oil and gas. We would have spoken previously to information ICT and green economy, renewables, those kinds of things. They remain relevant. The new areas that we believe are already evident relate to oil and gas, as I indicated, marine, shipping, blue economy. And we're going to go forward with that understanding. There is work that is being done in different places. One of the things that governments have suffered from in the past is the siloing that I spoke to earlier. So you have information in 2 or 3 places, but a ministry or a department decides to do the entire work again. There's information available already within government, but there's already a lot of research work being done by international organizations that can help to inform us. The other thing is that in conversations with the minister responsible for economic affairs, there could also be assistance that we can get. You know, from our perspective, ILO is willing to assist, but there's also other possible sources of either funding or TA, technical assistance, that we can tap into to achieve the objective. And as a ministry, we have taken the view that we really have to leverage relationships to get what we want done. So for example, straighten off your question for a bit, just to say that for third sector development, we're going to have next month a facilitation exercise, but that's going to be done in conjunction with UNDP, as opposed to the ministry fronting and funding the entire exercise. There are partners that we're going to leverage relationships.
Thank you, Minister. I'm happy to hear that the work of your ministry clearly then is not being compromised, but that you found an innovative way to proceed.
Not that we would not like to have more money. I don't want to say that, but we will be effective with what we have.
I'm sure you've just sent shudders down the spine of the 2 honourable members who sit to my left. Honourable Minister, the other question is, I received actually from a constituent as I was sitting here, and as you always say, you speak for the people in Rose Hill and Bosco Bell, I speak for the people in St. Michael South. I was asked the question in relation to the Employment Rights Tribunal. And I have a constituent whose sister had a case before the tribunal. It was tried, it was heard, and in September, I don't want to say the exact date, she received a ruling saying that her former employer was wrong, and it was a case of unfair dismissal, and had to pay a relatively significant sum of money by October 31st. It's on your website, so I know it's also true. And to date, nothing has been paid. And I'm trying to figure out what in law are the consequences for an employer not responding to the ruling of the tribunal, if there are penalties, if this stands up in a court, like what could she do now to ensure that these funds, and if there's nothing that the tribunal can do, then why would we take a tribunal decision seriously?
The tribunal makes orders, which is what you would have seen, and specifies the quantum after all the deliberations. Now, Section 47 of the Act says, where the tribunal makes an order or award in respect of the payment of a sum, and the chairman or deputy chairman of the tribunal certifies that the order or award has been so made, and specifies the terms of the order or award in the certificate, the order or award is enforceable as if it were an order made by a magistrate's court in civil proceedings. Now, the case that you speak to is not one that I am aware of, so that what we will do on leaving this place is to speak to the employer concerned, or the person who had employed, who's been found to be at fault in this situation, and to indicate to them that the enforcement is similar to the enforcement of a magistrate in a civil proceeding, in a civil matter. So it is enforceable. In other words, civil matters, bailiffs, those kinds of things, just as a magistrate in a civil court can enforce, the tribunal can enforce.
Thank you, Minister. I look forward to you investigating on behalf of my constituent.
Yes,
no
I
more
certainly
questions,
will.
Madam Chair.
What happens in the case when the employer is a government entity? Because they have a few constituents that would have won cases, not necessarily employment rights tribunal, but would have won cases for injury on the job or anything, and 10 years have gone and not a cent.
Sorry, I forgot I've kept this on. No, matters that relate to government, we came to office to serve the people and found a whole large number of these matters. I am not as able to respond to you as the Honourable Attorney General would be, but I would say that we have started the process of settling some of these long outstanding. Whenever they come to cabinet, everybody feels terrible because governments have allowed, and the last government in particular, these matters to fester, to stay outstanding for a really, really long time. We had a situation where BIDC workers, for example, who were terminated in 2013, I think it was, 2013, 2014, only received payment very recently. But what I was saying is that government has seen a lot of these long-standing matters, and those, because you were speaking specifically to, especially the ones in government, and has started the process of settling those matters.
Are you I see no further questions. I just have one thing I'm interested in. Could you please enlighten me on the role of the labor with respect to the HIV AIDS prevention and control? I'm a little lost on that one. Is there somebody?
Some years ago, in every ministry, there was established when the HIV/AIDS epidemic was kind of at its height. There was established departments in every ministry to help in the fight against the spread of HIV, which leads to AIDS. It is apparent that the fight has had some measure of success. While you see in the head, or a subhead, HIV/AIDS program, that program now goes beyond HIV and AIDS. And I would say to you that the admin officer who is responsible, Ms. Farley, who's responsible for this area, is also the officer who has done significant work on the discrimination legislation. So that coming out of HIV and AIDS, the epidemic, the stigma, the discrimination, the evolution of that department places us now in the position where that department has worked hard to develop legislation, well, a bill, proposed legislation, that will speak to discrimination, not just as it relates to medical matters, but as it relates to all matters in the area of workplaces. We've also made a policy decision within the ministry to expand on the medical side the remit of that department, not just to HIV and AIDS, but to chronic non-communicable diseases as well. We've been very clear, though, that we will not take our eyes off of HIV and AIDS, because often what happens is that when you broaden or you change the thing that you had under control becomes a problem again. So we're not going to do that. The other thing that that department, headed by Ms. Farley, is doing is, again, to do with the broadening. Government has, in either late 2018 or early 2019, approved a national workplace wellness policy. And that national workplace wellness policy is based on a number of pillars, 7, 9, I don't remember the number of pillars, but pillars that include physical health, but not limited to physical health, emotional, spiritual, psychological, etc. And that department, which is styled in terms of its name, HIV/AIDS, is responsible for rolling out the National Workplace Wellness Policy, working in close collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness, where overall wellness is located in terms of government allocations of responsibilities. So a much wider remit than the name suggests.
Thank you. There being no further questions, I ask you to submit in 10 minutes. I'll move the head.
All right, I'm not sure what to say in summary that hasn't been said before. I would use this opportunity, Madam Chair, to thank a relatively small but very hard-working team in the Ministry of Labor and Social Partnership Relations. All the people you see behind me work hard. And that includes, sorry, the ones beside me as well, including the one to my right. They all work very hard. I'm not saying to you, Madam Chair, that I have a ministry where nobody shirks, but all the people you see in here are people who work, and work hard with limited people resources, sometimes limited funding, but they find innovative ways. My permanent secretary is supporting me today. She is wearing on this the 20 whatever day, you would see lime green as part of her attire, and that speaks to the level of support that we enjoy. But we work as a team, and we have been able to accomplish quite a bit. We recognize, though, that this is not time to rest on our laurels. There's a lot of work to be done as it relates to ensuring that all Barbadians recognize the dignity of work, that they're afforded the opportunities for training and development, that the country understands where we're going and what the skills are and what the skill sets are that are going to be needed for the future, for our future development. We recognize that we encourage people to do the right thing, especially employers, but also workers. We also recognize that we have to buttress all of that with a good, strong legislative framework, and we will continue to do that. We recognize the importance and the work of the third sector. It is a sector driven by people who have passion that it is not possible to pay a public servant to replicate, or even a minister to replicate. And so we, in recognizing that, also recognize our role as a government to facilitating them, to creating the environment that allows them to do what they want to do, which is to help people, help society, help the country. And we will continue to move forward in consultation with them to bring a framework, a legislative framework, and to put into place that framework that will allow for their facilitation. Somebody mentioned earlier, and I didn't get a chance to speak to that, but the matter of a registry and a registrar, those are things, that is where we're going. Not to hinder, not to hamstring, not to give direction to, but to facilitate. That is this government's approach to governance. We allow people to do what they have to do, what they do best, and we believe our role is to facilitate. We will continue to engender good relations among the social partners so that we all remain engaged in the process of nation building, even at this difficult time. But we also have promised that the social partnership will not be for us only a vehicle to be used when times are difficult. Relationships are built on communication. And so we will continue to have that communication with our partners so that in good times we communicate, in difficult times we just continue that communication. And finally, but not least, because this probably encapsulates everything as it relates to workers, the third sector, and the social partnership, the matter of social justice. This is 2020. The era of exclusion, discrimination, disrespecting people must come to an end. And located in this ministry, and we had the first reading this afternoon, the matter of addressing discrimination frontally will be taking place in this ministry, first in the workplace, and then more generally, working with the Honourable Attorney General on that secondary aspect, but making sure that all the groups in society, especially groups that are considered to be vulnerable, are given the opportunity to have their voices heard. We say that everybody has a voice, but sometimes the louder voices drown out the softer voices. Sometimes the stronger voices do not allow us to hear the weaker voices. The Social Justice Committee is the vehicle that will allow those softer voices to be magnified, to be heard, to be taken into consideration as we develop policy in this country. I am thankful to my team, and I'm thankful to this Honourable Chamber for allowing us this opportunity to ventilate in a pretty fulsome manner the work that we are undertaking on a daily basis. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I beg to move. Sorry. Go ahead.
Let him move the head. Please ask that the head stand part.
Could I move that head 84 stamp part? No. Do you want to call the amount or?
We will call it.
I don't have, okay. I move that head 84 stand par.
Question is that head 84 in the sum of $7,127,896 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
Question is that I now report to the Honourable Speaker, beg for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman of Committee has reported progress and asks for leave to sit again.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 4:50 p.m.
The question is that this honorable chairman stands suspended until 4:50 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chairman stands suspended until 4:50 p.m.